let me get started. And again, I see that Wissam and Mario and Hugo, you didn't maybe receive the email. I apologize for that, but I will need to start this workshop and talk about great stuff. So again, bear with me, and you should be able to follow along anyway. I'm Mathieu Benoit. I'm customer success engineer at Humanitec. And I'm delivering platform engineering best practice and reference architecture and technical deep dive implementation around internal developer platform with my customer, which is really exciting. And I'm also a Cloud Native Computing Foundation ambassador, CNCF ambassador. And today we will talk about how all the tools you may have already or you are looking for, let's say Backstage, Terraform, Kubernetes, and maybe an orchestrator like Humanitec, how they fit together, how they complement each other, and how you could maybe build your own internal developer platform with those two, right? You are at the right place if you're registered. We have a pretty packed agenda, so let me stride in, start the content. The agenda is pretty high-level information and context, just to talk about what's an IDP, internal developer platform, where we are coming from with that, and maybe with Humanitec, how you could have your own reference architecture. I will do a quick demo, just an end-to-end demo. Throughout the workshop, you will be able to do and play both personas, developer as well as platform engineer, and you will see, you will play with both, which I think could be very exciting to see the concept and the collaboration. And we will have time for the actual workshop where I will walk through the steps. So you could just watch me and listen, or you could also participate in some regard. So that's the purpose and the content of this pretty packed agenda. We will have some wrap-up resources, Q&A at the end, but please ask your question as they come in the Q&A section of this Zoom call or the chat, whatever it's best for you. And I will try to answer as I'm going through the content. I don't want to wait at the end of these 2 hours to answer questions that you ask at the beginning. So please let the flow coming and the question, and I will try to do my best to answer the question as they come. For example, is this session being recorded? Yes, we will. It's recorded, and we will send the video of this, the recording of this webinar. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other question. So yeah, let's move on. You again may have received, I hope, with the email you registered, you may have received this kind of email template where you could claim your account now in order to go in the Humanitec portal, and we will discuss why. It's not mandatory for you, so please bear with me if you don't have, and don't panic. We will see a lot of content. We will play both personas again, and the goal here will be, at the end of this session, to have a better understanding of what could be a workload specification, like the CNCF project score, in order to abstract from your developer technical detail implementation and complexity around infrastructure and Kubernetes. So how you could boost their productivity as platform engineer for your developer, and also a concept of the orchestrator on top of your platforms and tools, how this important piece is helping you as platform engineer for more standardization, abstraction, and stability for the different personas as well, security, SRE, observability, etc., etc. And we will see what could be the difference between an IDP, internal developer platform, versus another IDP, internal developer portal, right? So the difference between platform and portal, we are still seeing some confusion. And here today, you will see live how they complement each other, right? So that's the objective of today. I hope you signed up for that. So let me start with a very history of why platform engineering and why internal developer platform. So you may remember this sysadmin area and era, actually, where I was a developer and I was coding, testing, maybe, and packaging my app. And at some point, it was a package, and someone, maybe a sysadmin, was able to deploy that, right? And came later this DevOps motion and DevOps culture, where how we could break the silo between a dev and someone actually deploying and operating the application. So the DevOps movement, if I could say, was about a cultural approach to break the silos. And some people out there were about to say and are saying that, hey, if you build it, you need to run it. But what does that mean? And we have seen some issue with that and cognitive load on the developer, where as a developer, let's say front-end or back-end, Java, Python, Node.js, am I doing Kubernetes and Terraform and cloud security and stuff like this? Because I need to run my application, right? And that's where the platform engineering, on top of the learnings and the best practice from the sysadmin world and DevOps world, came and say, yeah, let's have a better collaboration. And having these two worlds in better approach and better seamless interaction. So that's where the platform engineering era is coming from. And that's where you may be looking for building your own internal developer platform on top of your tools and your cultural process in place, right? Because it's all about reusing what you have, right? It's not reinventing the wheel, it's just optimizing. And here, it's also coming from objectives and clear objective from different personas. One of the persona out there is a developer. How I could be more productive to deliver value for my business, but for the end user. How I could make more money to my company, right? Shipping code in production, right? On the CIO perspective, there is some like outcome, how I could shorten the time to market, how we could deliver faster for our end user to have happiness and sell more to our end customer. Architect, they will be able to drive more standardization, how I could have more standardization out there, right? And not having 200 of shadow IT and different ways to do stuff. Financial perspective, maybe, how I could save some cost on a cloud perspective, for example, or ops perspective. On operation, how I could have more automation to simplify the process and standardize as well. And by default, how can I be secure and compliant, right? So all these personas, security, SRE, cloud ops, app dev, and other key stakeholders have different needs all around this, what could bring this notion of internal developer platform. At the end of the day, we could summarize with two main personas. The developer, again, I want to be productive, right? And I don't want to do infrastructure and Terraform. Maybe I want, if I want in my LinkedIn and CV, curriculum vitae, I want that I'm able to do full stack, Java, Terraform, Kubernetes and security. Yes, that's good for me. But for the company as a wide, it's not what you are paying for. You are paying for, and your job should be focusing on quality code to ship feature in production, right? And maybe you want the help of other stakeholders, right? You are not alone already in your organization. That's why there is this maybe brand new team, platform engineering, which is actually facilitating and aggregating different other personas and platforms and tools, right? They are not alone. There is security, there is observability, there is cloud engineer over there, right? And the goal is to how I could abstract, standardize, and automate as much as possible in order to simplify the life of the developer. I will just check in the chat if there is anything already. Is there any way to get the email to get the user seat for the workshop if we register late? That's a good question. I won't be able to switch on that, unfortunately. I will try to see during the workshop if I can, but for now, I won't be able to do that, Ryan. So I mentioned that earlier on the call. Please bear with me. I will walk through all the concept and all the technical detail, so you will learn anyway, even if you are not practicing by yourself. I apologize for that, but I want to cover a lot of content, so let's make sure I'm going through. At the end of the day, platform engineering is all about the velocity for the developer. It's about the stability as the company, but more as the platform engineering perspective. And something you need to maybe invest on or develop is having this product mindset. Because the internal developer platform you will be able to build should be seen as a product. So you should have this platform as a product mindset, because now you are a product. You have customer. As platform engineer, I'm building a product which is a platform, and I have customers and maybe multiple stakeholders and partner and customer. So here I have a roadmap. What are the priority? What do we want to support? What is off track in short, medium, or long term? So I have a roadmap in my project. So that's very important. It's not just about technical concept. It's also about the project mindset. There are 3 main pillars in order to be successful in your IDP adoption, because having a product is good, but with this project mindset in mind, how you generate a concrete adoption, right? You may have seen this quote, I have built and spent months and years building a platform, but nobody is using it. You don't want that, right? So you need to think about the adoption strategy as well. So you need to think about how I abstract things, how I standardize things, and how I help people having visualization in order to do more self-serving. We will see in action how SCORE could help you on this abstraction, how the standardization could be accomplished with the Humanitec Orchestrator, and we will talk about a portal. Here, Humanitec portal, and we'll see also Backstage, right? How they fit together, that's the goal of this session. SCORE, I don't know if you know SCORE, it's a CNCF project, Sandbox, open source project, and the goal is to have a workload specification. As a developer, I'm defining this YAML file you could see on the screen, and I'm just describing how my workload, my application, could be deployed. Where it is, when it is, I don't know. So I will have this platform agnostic and environment agnostic way to describe what I want. And I will deep dive a little bit on that. I will have a section describing the metadata and specification around my application. And you could see at the bottom, the resources dependencies. I need a DNS because I want to expose my application, maybe. I want a Redis database. I want a MySQL. What's the password? What's the username? What's the interaction between my application and the actual resources? Is it in AWS, Azure, and GCP? This should be abstracted, right? With that, I could focus on my code and just describing a contract between what I want and the platform. Then there is the orchestrator, and the orchestrator will be the place where platform engineering, with the help of different stakeholders, technical stakeholders, will be able to define recipes, what we call resource definition. If someone is asking for a Redis, here is a recipe in order to provision or provide a Redis. And in this context of development, maybe you want to go in cluster database, but maybe staging and production, you want to use a cloud provider, right? GCP, AWS, and Azure maybe. So here you have the choice to define all the recipes depending on the context of the request, right? Again, I want a DNS, I want a Redis, I want a MySQL. You will be able to define how to fulfill this request and having more standardization. On a workflow perspective, you have the platform engineers defining the recipes, like I mentioned, by type, Redis, MySQL, DNS, etc., per environment. So you will have this matrix defined. And on the other end, all of this below and at the bottom is abstracted from a developer perspective. Again, as a developer perspective, I will define my code, my Docker file, and my score file, the YAML file you are seeing, just to describe my intent, right? And then I will push that via a CICD pipeline, and I will ping the orchestrator. The orchestrator will be able to resolve the recipes asked in this context, and will be able to build what we call the resource graph, right? That's the graph of dependencies between the workload itself running in Kubernetes, but also all the dependencies, right? In cluster or outside the cluster, if you want to have connectivity and dependencies in AWS, in Azure, in GCP. As an example, here I'm asking for Redis. If I'm asking for Redis, going through the CICD, orchestrator getting the actual recipe I need, and boom, provisioning accordingly this Redis item and resource in the graph. So that's how it's working, right? Combination of recipes, orchestrator, and the score file to generate the actual rendered graph of the resources and the dependency. I hope that makes sense so far, because the last piece is the visualization, right? And I got a question. So let me answer the question from Peter. Thank you for asking. Good question. Score is instead of Helm, and you're totally right. Exactly. Yeah, you got it. As a developer, you don't touch anymore Kubernetes manifest. You don't touch Helm chart, customize. You are touching score file. Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you for asking for clarification. That's exactly the goal. Let me check the chat. Yeah. No more question, but feel free to ask this kind of question. I really appreciate it. It's refining what I'm talking about, which is good for the audience. Thank you for that. The third pillar and piece here is visualization. I need to self-serve, right? Everything as code is good, but sometimes I need to self-serve. I need to have some logs. I need to visualize what could be my project I'm involved with, the status of the deployment, the relationship between the workload and application, and the external dependencies. So here you could see within the Humanitec portal, right, on top of the Humanitec orchestrator, you will have a portal, right, able to visualize in this concrete example, in this screenshot, the graph of the dependencies I was referring to. That's one aspect. I could look at some logs on the running application. And here, I'm not touching Kubernetes directly. I'm not touching the cloud provider directly. This could be abstracted if your organization and if the use cases with the IDP you are building, the internal developer platform you are building, you select what are the interaction, abstraction, and interfaces between your dev and your platform. Here, you could have a way to abstract whatever you want here, instead of having multiple tools and interfaces to have information. We have the Humanitec portal, but what you could do as well is bringing your own portal. So you may have already investment in Port, Cortex, and here today we will illustrate with Backstage. You could bring them and they will interact with the orchestrator, with the API, like our own Humanitec portal is doing, right? So it's yet another portal, options. Backstage is a very well-known in the industry, especially as a CNCF project, and a lot of giant and very active community. And it's allowing a lot of personalization, customization, right? So if you want to go there and having more customization, that's where Backstage is good, and you could still interact with the orchestrator, right? And that's what we will show today in action. Complementary to that, when you take Humanitec as the orchestrator, you have the portal as well. So it could be complementary as well. And you decide, again, to not have a lot of tools for your developer. What are the UI, UX you want for them? I will grab some question maybe. Let me double check. How does the orchestrator know the context? Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Mark. You will see in action, but typically you see the score file. You will have your CICD or the developer, but most often you will have automation here. But someone will say, hey, orchestrator, take this core file in this context. The context is at least two information. For this project, what we call Humanitec application, and this environment, development, staging, and production. So with these two items, to simplify, that's the context, right? And with that, you will be able to say, oh, you are this project. Oh, by the way, for any project for Redis is this. Oh, but you are this project in this dev environment. Oh, we want to be more granular with this recipe specifically, right? So that's the context here. Good question. Again, a pair of project/environment, and there is more, but that's the most common use cases here. How do we manage the access? For example, how does compute resource EMR with S3? I understand the access from the application, the workload, right? Accessing the S3 bucket, let's say. That's a good question. And actually, you will be able, if that's a question, otherwise clarify, you will be able to inject, let's say, pod identity, if you want, via the recipes defined in your orchestrator, right? So that could be one way to answer this question, if I understand correctly. Otherwise, clarify in the same thread, and I could illustrate more. Can the portal authentication be federated with an organization identity provider? Yes, very good question as well. Yes. For Backstage, I'm not an expert in Backstage, but there is federation and authentication load over there for sure. I could talk about the Humanitec portal. Yes. GitHub, Gmail, and you could bring your own Okta or other IDP you have, AAD, or now I don't remember the name in Azure, but yeah, Azure Active Directory. You could bring them and federate via SSO SAML configuration for having the SSO on your own, from your own IDP, which is not internal developer platform, but more your identity provider, like you ask. Thank you for asking. And yes, for sure, where you could have some synchronization as well on authorization and airbag. Good question. Let me continue. Is if Humanitec has a portal for self-serving, then why we need Backstage? Yeah, good question, Conrad. Actually, you will see in action. I will say first answer, highly customization in Backstage. In Humanitec, it's an opinionated way to have a portal. And you could play and see both, and you could decide which one you want to continue with. You could continue with both. You could select, for example, for the platform engineering, having the Humanitec portal and developer just Backstage. You see, so that could be this kind of option. I'm helping my customer to see option and decide as they are testing and making sure they are fine-tuning the interface and the interaction points from their own IDP, right? And again, I don't have the generic answer for you, but that's a kind of option you should fill and test. And I hope you will have some feeling and answer for your question. Otherwise, let me know later in this workshop. Cool. Wonderful. I love the question. I'm taking time because it's very important, and I appreciate someone asking because I'm sure a lot of people are asking the same question. Let's move on the ref architecture. The ref architecture, you may be familiar with that. It's layers of tools you are already you already have in your own ecosystem and company, right? What I want to clear and clarify right away is Humanitec is not managing your cluster, is not managing your container registry, is not replacing them. It's not replacing your CICD. You see the yellow boxes? We are integrating in all your own ecosystem. Here, I have a GCP ecosystem and reference architecture. It could be AWS, OpenShift. You mix and match because at the end of the day, there is not one ref architecture out there. You have your own tool, Jenkins, GitLab, you pick and choose, right? And the yellow boxes, the orchestrator, score, and the portal, will be the actual things that we are adding on top of your existing tools in order to fulfill the objective we mentioned earlier. Abstraction and productivity for the developer, as well as standardization and abstraction from a platform engineering perspective, right? So I want to clarify that because sometimes people are confused. We don't replace all the white boxes. We are just adding on top of your existing CICD workflow, etc., etc. And I will illustrate that. We have some reference architecture here. We have also some what we call resource pack. I will explain later what it is, but just so you know, with some reference you could follow here to inspire building your own reference architecture. Now it's time for a demo, right? I will double check if there is any question. I already answered the organization identity provider. It's an orchestrator, right? The integrated build needs to be delivered to Humanitec Platform Orchestrator. Yes, you're right. And I will illustrate that right away. So what I want to show you very quickly, and let me start something for you very quickly, just to make sure I won't waste time here. What I want to do is actually starting from Backstage, because as a developer, right? So let me switch to this view here. Here we are. Sorry for the back and forth on the screen. I hope you see this screen. I'm logged in as a developer in Backstage. That's what my company, my platform engineer, decided for me to have an interaction with my internal developer platform. I have a portal. I may have technical documentation here, how to onboard on a new project, how to have visibility, what they call service catalog in order to see, I don't know, logging, monitoring, advanced tool, and also my running container. So that's a single pane of glass and portal that people decided that me, as developer, I will be productive with, right? So I have this single pane of contact interface, if I could say, where I could have multiple centralized information and not having 10 tools, for example, right? So that could be a decision tree and maker here. How many tools your developer are signing in, if you can centralize all these different tools and having just one place, that's where Backstage will help you. And here I have already 3 components. In this case, let's call them project. And look at this, I have this guy here. I could have some information and I could see the environment deployed somewhere. And this somewhere, guess what, is via Humanitec. But at the end of the day, it's in your own infrastructure and Kubernetes cluster. But you could see that here in Backstage, I have already some information. I could see that I have a development environment for this project, PR1 for pull request 1, and I will explain why. I have staging, I have production, I could see some information here. In one environment, I have a workload, I have some dependencies here, a DNS, for example. Oh, I have an URL, a host, a DNS that I could test, for example. So if I go there, I could open it, and I have my application running, which is good. So that's kind of information I could have, right? And here, what I want to show you now is from this, I could go either, for example, to GitHub, because Backstage could have interaction with GitHub. We will see some activities and action here. And here I have this, repository from my enterprise, and that's exactly where my code resides, right? I have the code here. It's a very simple application here. And I have a Docker file here for building my container, and I have the score file. So I will deep dive a little bit here, but that's my repo as developer. I could clone and doing that locally and commit, etc., right? On the other hand, what I also have is from here access to maybe a complementary tool I want to have access, federated for authentication. And here I'm in the Humanitec portal. Again, complementary to the other one, you see here, I have my project. And by the way, I have access to a list of projects. like I could have in Backstage. I just see my project, right? I have access to with airbag access. And look at this, I could see this project pod info and the exact same environment, because at the end of the day, they are talking to the same Humanitec API. And here I could see that, yes, I have development, PR1, staging, and production, and I will have the development. And I could see, for example, that here the graph generated when I deploy that at some point is generated here, right? That's something you could see in the Humanitec portal, not yet in the Backstage plugin, for example, but that's something very relevant where I could get more information, right? And I will have the URL to test my application. Guess what? It's opening the same application here, right? So that's this kind of interaction from Backstage, having access to GitHub, and information about my, my running workload. If I go back here, for example, I could go there. I could have some information of the status of the deployment. I could also see the dependencies, the graph, but I could also see the running logs. And I don't need to have access to Kubernetes, for example, to see if there is any logs coming in, right? So that's a kind of interaction, abstracted again, about how to resolve dependencies, how to see status here. That's what I wanted to start with, right? I will grab some question. Which plugin do you use to visualize environment in this overview panel? It's a real good question. We have a plugin, Backstage plugin, which is the Humanitec plugin, right? So we have this Humanitec plugin that you could integrate in your own Backstage instance and development. Good question. I don't have the link handy, but you could look. Actually, the demo I'm doing is kind of open source, so I could also share with you the actual Backstage instance with the use of the plugin. So that reminds me that I could send that at the end if I'm not forgetting. But yeah, you could look for the Humanitec plugin for Backstage. Good question. Thank you for asking. So what I want to show you now is here. I just opened this project, right? I'm in GitHub code space here. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but bear with me, because at the end of the day, I just cloned locally the Git repository, and I'm interacting with my own application. I could debug and run locally, test locally. I have a Docker file to package, right? In this case, it's a pre-packaged container, but bear with me again. Building Java, .NET application, Node.js, that's the same pattern. That's the advantage of having container. So here I'm very in my developer inner loop, right? I'm in my VS Code, if you're using VS Code, but any IDE. And here I could, for example, connect to my portal, and actually to my IDP, sorry, to my internal developer platform, right? Here, what I want to do is opening this guy, and I will here authorize this guy, and I'm coming back here. And now what I could do with VS Code is actually using this guy here, and I will be able to use the VS Code extension, right? In order to speed up my developer inner loop. So here what I did is I'm using, again, the VS Code extension, because here I could have some process helping me, and let's say interaction with my own platform in order to author the score file. Because at the end of the day, what I have is the score file next to my application. Why? Because as a developer, I know how to describe how I want to deploy. What are the dependencies, right? I don't know how to do that, and I don't want to know. But what I know is how to describe what I want, right? And that's the score file again. And the score file here, I could have some help with a linter telling me that I'm not compliant with the specification here, so to speed up the productivity. But I will be able to define, again, the container part of my workload. If I want to expose my workload on which port, I know this part. And here, the list of resources, what are my dependencies, right? So here, for example, I have DNS, but let's say I want to have an S3 bucket. Why not, right? So what I have here, and sorry for the pop-up here, here I could add, hey, I want an S3 bucket, but look at the error message. Here, we could say that it's not supported by my organization, actually, right? So maybe because I'm on GCP, I don't know, but my platform engineer decided that I cannot use S3 bucket, right? So I have this validation here. I'm using the VS Code extension, but at the end of the day, you have the Humanitec CLI that you could use if you are not with VS Code, and you will be able to say, please validate this this file here. And what I could do, sorry about that. I will just set my organization. And here it will be this guy over there. Here we are. Sorry for the config part, clear. But what I mean is, if you don't have the VS Code extension, you could also use the humctl CLI. And here, supposedly, I will have some warnings and linter as well. This could be run locally in your CICD, but here I could see that, yeah, S3 is not supported. So no, I shouldn't do that, right? And look at this on the left-hand side. I have also the list of available resources. Actually, I can use Redis, if you could see here. I can use DNS. I can use Postgres, right? So now if I put here my Redis, that's something supported, supposedly, right? So here it shouldn't complain anymore if I validate, right? If you don't have the VS Code extension again, what you could have is what are the available resource type for the dependencies I can use, right? In my own organization, by my own platform engineer. And I could have the exact same list here in order to validate and see what I can do. So I could have the technical documentation in order to speed up my process to integrate that in my score file. But here is what is supported. Again, I cannot do S3. I cannot do, I don't know, RabbitMQ or whatever, because it's not yet supported. Maybe I should ask the project team of my platform to add some support because I need S3, let's say, right? But today it's not supported. So that's the kind of interaction you will have and you will be able to have, right? I will grab some question here. Can the portal show info related to serverless services like AWS Lambda and visualize also logs coming from CloudWatch? That's a good question. For now, Humanitec Orchestrator just support Kubernetes runtime. So container deployed in Kubernetes. We are coming with something around serverless and other runtime, but not yet supported, but coming for sure. Good question. So just container in Kubernetes for now. What if we are not using Humanitec? Can we list the resource if we are using GitHub? Actually, no. The interaction I'm showing you, the VS Code extension, it's Humanitec VS Code extension, and the humctl, it's Humanitec CLI, interacting directly with the IDP in Humanitec, right? So you need Humanitec for this. But that's a good question because I could show you something if we have time at the end where you could use score, right, without the Humanitec orchestrator, which is another story, but still the same principle here with the score file locally. I won't spend too much time now, just to make sure we have time to continue the workshop. But yeah, good question. Other question here. Thank you, Drew, for sharing the plugin of Backstage. In the execution environment within a container, or is it hosted on a virtual platform? Yeah, container will be deployed in a Kubernetes cluster that the platform engineer will say, orchestrator, for this project in this environment, you will deploy any container in this Kubernetes over there. We don't manage a cluster. right? But we will help you to deploy over there. So the runtime is a Kubernetes cluster that you bring your own cluster. We don't manage. And it's not a stupid question at all. Very good question. Thank you for asking. And if it's not clear, ask me for clarification. I should provide more straightforward answer to your question. Virtual platform, I just mean external platform provide. Yeah, so yeah, you bring your own runtime to the Kubernetes cluster and we will help you deploy over there actually. Good question. Thank you for that. Cool. What I want to show you now, so I'm in my developer inner loop, right? And here I could do branch, feature branch, I could commit, etc., etc. To speed up the process of my demo, I have already in this repo, right? Same code, same repo. I have already done a pull request, right? Because I want to change the UI and the color of, you remember, the blue background and the message. I just want to change, right? It's a feature request to deliver value for my customer. So I just did a change in my code or wherever it was required, right? So I did the change and look at this. I did multiple commit in this pull request. And I have some interaction with the Humanitec Orchestrator, right, in order to deploy. So here, I'm doing a pull request, and I will show you, it's actually my PR-1 environment. I don't know as a developer, but that's what we saw earlier. And I have a temporary DNS in order to test my application. And guess what? I have the new message, and I'm in a green background now, right, because that's what I wanted to test. So I have an ephemeral environment just created for me, for my project, and I'm able to deploy, right? And I will see the diff between the previous deployment and yes, I remove a fake message and I have a new container image. And yes, I change the color of pod info and I change the message as well. That's what I added. And I'm replacing some metadata and I remove the previous message. So that's a kind of interaction. Again, I'm not leaving my developer inner loop. I'm in GitHub or GitLab. I committed, I did a PR, and someone in CICD on behalf of me deployed this new version in a temporary environment, right? And again, I could go from there. I could go in Backstage if I want, right? Here, pod info, and I could see PR1. That's the one here, right? That's the exact same information. But I could go also in Humanitec. And that's where I will see again my PR1 and all the information here, right? And I could see that I have my workload here. And I have some environment variable. Yes, that's what I change, right? Hello Humanitec and the color of the background. So that was kind of a long demo, if I could say, but that's what we will illustrate step by step, kind of, all this concept and how you wire up the CI/CD part of that. So I hope it makes sense. I hope you find that interesting on the developer perspective. So this demo was very developer focused, interaction and abstraction as much as possible. And what we will see is now how, as platform engineer as well, you could wire this up. Right? Cool. So let me move on to the next part of this workshop. Again, if you don't have access to the Humanitec portal, no worries at all. You could follow along. I hope you already learned some stuff because you could see in action what I will do. Again, you should have received this email, claim your account, and you will have access to the Orchestrator. We will do 4 steps here. How I onboard, I'm scaffolding a new project, a new application from Backstage, for example, right? That could be a use case. I will illustrate how to do that, how I'm onboarding. I want to have template and accelerating and onboarding of a project. The second step will be how I develop a feature request with this ephemeral environment we just saw and maybe promoting to other environments. We will add database dependencies. We will see the notion behind the scene of Is it in cluster? Is it outside the cluster? And we will see how the other tech stakeholder, like security engineer, could inject more standardization and security and governance in all this graph resolution and pipeline. So that's the 4 steps we will go through with a challenge of that in 1 hour and 10 minutes remaining. Cool. So you should start from here, right? Even if you don't have access yet to the Humanitec portal, no worries. You could have, I just put this Backstage instance as a public instance for now. So you could even play with that. So that's something you could already do, even if you don't have claimed your account yet, right? So this URL is this guy here that I'm sending in the chat for the benefits of everyone. You should be able to use this public instance of Backstage I have. And that's where you will start, right? So go to this URL, scan the code, the QR code. That's where you will go. You will go to this Backstage instance. We'll just wait a little bit just to make sure. But typically, please go there, even if you haven't received an email or you haven't claimed your account in Humanitec. It's independent. I made this Backstage instance public, so you could go there and do the first step with me, right? So here, I will go to the Backstage instance. And here, what I want to do, you remember the first step, and I have already someone starting, which is good. Maybe someone who knows Backstage. Again, Backstage, I'm not an expert, but has 3 main features that you could use. Technical documentation. You could centralize all your technical documentation in this portal. You could also scaffold and help scaffolding project based on template. I want a Node.js or Java application with Postgres. Could you help me create a Git repository, create some artifact for me, a Docker file, because as a developer, how I could onboard very quickly. And the third feature of Backstage will be service catalog. Once I'm onboarded, right, how I could see the different components in my project. And maybe you want to aggregate logs from external Datadog, Splunk, etc., all combined with different plugins in a single UI, right? So that's the goal of Backstage, having highly customizable interface to have a better place and centralized place for your developer, right? So I will summarize that like this if you're not familiar with Backstage. And here, one of the first scenario we want is, and we have another person doing that, actually 3 people, which is good. Here, that's everyone in my organization. That's not my project. But me, as a developer, I could onboard, and you look at this, select the scaffolding part I was mentioning, the second feature. I want to scaffold a new project, right? It's a brand new project. Help me accelerate my onboarding, right? So here, I could select a Node.js service talking to a Postgres database, or MySQL in this case, or I will speed up the process here, but I could do the pod info template. So I will choose it. I will fill out some information, maybe some metadata, my business unit cost center, or some information. But in this case, I will just name it my project, right? To be more explicit here, and review. And here, yeah, I'm filling out all the information. It's abstracted all the complexity for me. And now create. And here, Backstage will do different steps and will call what they call Backstage plugins. There is 2 plugins mainly used here, GitHub and Humanitec. The first one will actually publish here, will create a Git repository in my GitHub organization, right? And I will show you with the template. With that, I could start right away. And in the meantime, it's also registering this project, what we call Humanitec application, in Humanitec. With that, I could see some interaction, right? So now I could open within Backstage the service catalog I mentioned, the third feature, look at this. Now I have a list of projects I have access to, right? So you could follow along with me, right? And do that if you want. And here, I was this guy here. You could do that with yours. And look at this. I have a development in progress. And here, it's orchestrated by Humanitec. And there is no magic happening here. I will show you how it's happening. To step back, we just scaffold a GitHub repository, I will show you, and we register that in Humanitec. And someone is already deploying something in the dev environment. Who is this someone and how to do that? I will now jump in the view source part. If you open the view source, you will see, like me, an organization made for the workshop. And look at this. There is one repository by new project scaffold, right? And I will find mine. Like I'm seeing all you people doing that while I'm doing that. Thank you. But here I have my repo. It's a repo within my organization, right? It's a public repo organization in this case, but you will be able to accomplish that in your own private enterprise GitHub or GitLab account, right? And here, guess what? I got this same repository I was demoing earlier, right? I have the code to do Java or whatever the template I selected. I have the Docker file maybe because maybe I want to be accelerated on writing a Docker file. And I have some artifacts and I have the score file as well, right? So here, as a developer, someone helped me to have a scaffolding template. Here, I could update. I will change some stuff, right? I will change the name. I will change some stuff now that my application should do. I will change the source code. But now I reside not anymore in Backstage for that, in GitHub, because that's the source of truth for my code and where I will have also the CICD part, right? If you are familiar with GitHub Action, but it could work with Jenkins, it could work with GitLab pipeline, Azure DevOps pipeline. I have here a predefined workflow. As soon as I open a pull request, as soon as I commit in main, I have a deploy, and maybe when I close a PR, right? I'm doing ephemeral environment. Can I clean up the ephemeral environment as soon as it's open via pull request? And guess what? Backstage created the repository. It was an initial commit. And look at this. We could see that actions run. And I could see in the history just one. So as the initial commit, it was a push in main. One of the workflow I showed you, GitHub Action, I discussed, pull request, deploy, and delete PR. The deploy was kicking this deployment here on a push in main. And that's this guy actually now building here, you could see, Docker build. It's also pushing in my registry, in my private registry. Nothing related to Humanitec here, right? It's my enterprise CICD flow. And then that's where I will inform Humanitec. Please, could you deploy this score file? So that's where in your CICD, you will have an interaction with the humctl, Humanitec CLI, in order to deploy the score file. And earlier, I don't remember if it was Mark or Carl, or I don't remember the name, sorry for that, but you ask, hey, how we know which context? And look at this. That's how you will know. You will deploy, score deploy with the CLI, this score file for this environment development and for this project. And yeah, I'm in this organization, in my organization here. And that's how I will do that. I will also override the actual container image, because you may have noticed, and let me make sure you saw that. In the score file, here, you see containers image dot. As developer, I don't know which container image tag registry will be used by my CI/CD pipeline, right? So I don't know this part. It's dot, right? And that's where, in this guy here, this will be replaced. The actual container image just built earlier here in the pipeline, right? So please deploy this like this, right? And that's what's happening here. Hope that makes sense. Let me pause a little bit. I hope you are enjoying this Backstage flow, because at the end of the day, you should have access to what I mentioned, the public GitHub org and repo. So please look at the code I just showed you while I'm trying to answer the question. I already answered the if you are not using Humanitec from Hong, the second question. We will see score in action without Humanitec, but that's a different story. If you want to use Humanitec, you need Humanitec. And most of the workshop is based on Humanitec as well. I could illustrate more without Humanitec, but it won't be that advanced. And for Lambda, again, via Humanitec, it's just Kubernetes. Marcos, you ask, you have the infrastructure attached to the code of the product. Same pipeline for everything, a new feature or new resource. Wow, good question. Thank you, Marcos. I appreciate you ask for clarification because it's not clear, and yeah, let me clarify this part. You see this core file? That's exactly what you are asking. I hope I will answer correctly, and it will make sense. Here, the resource section will be deployed as in the same pipeline, right? You remember the humctl score deploy will deploy the entire score file. Here, that's the container part, the actual application, containerized application, but will be also deployed with the resources, right? And to illustrate that, then what's happening, right? Here in development, we reserved what we call the graph. Here there is a workload. That's the containerized application section in the score file. Boom, right? But before provisioning this guy, at the end of the day, it will be what? A deployment in Kubernetes, for example, a pod, right, running at the end of the day. But we will resolve all the dependencies before this guy, right? Because we want to inject secret. We want to inject config map. We want to inject connection string, etc., etc. And we will want to build and resolve all the graph dependencies of the resources section, right? So that's a really good question, because look at this. In my score file, I got the DNS explicitly coming from the workload here, right? But look at this. I have a root, I have an ingress, I have a TLS cert as well, and some other implicit resources that as a developer, I didn't mention, right? I just asked for a DNS. All of this graph will be resolved with explicit and direct ask for dependencies versus implicit and indirect dependencies. What I'm illustrating your question with this answer is because we will resolve all the resources infrastructure dependencies. If it's Terraform provisioning, and I will show you how to do that, we will wait, and we will resolve any dependencies. And then we will finally resolve the workload in this graph. So I hope it makes sense, but that's a really good question. Both will be deployed at the same time on the developer perspective, and we will resolve the graph and inject the dependencies. So that's a really good question. I hope it was clear enough in my answer. Wonderful. Let me check if you have the infrastructure attached. Yeah, okay, so the deployment needs to happen in a shared environment with the Humanitec instance, since the pipeline is acting as a shared as a resource. I'm not sure I'm getting your point and question, Raul. But again, from my CI pipeline, I will build the container, push it in a registry. That's it, nothing related to Humanitec. After that, you have a CD workflow. Do you want to push in an environment in main branch or master? Do you want to do manual deployment, whatever? At the end of the day, someone will trigger a deployment. That's where you say humctl score deploy on the score file with this container in this environment and project, right? So that's the workflow here. And that's where the Humanitec Orchestrator will resolve where after that to deploy the workload, containerized workload application versus all the other dependencies. And you will have option, because as platform engineer, you remember the recipes, and I will show you the recipes. You could say, oh, today it's here in EKS AWS, but tomorrow it's in AKS Azure. And on a developer standpoint, they don't care. it doesn't change anything. They are not changing either their score files, their application. They are not changing the CICD. It's just the platform engineering plugging and changing the recipes, right? So from one deployment to another, it could be changed, and you target wherever you want. And do you have like approval for each step? Like, for instance, the Terraform plan before applying it, something to prevent the developer to delete by mistake, a line on the score file. For instance, a database and the automatic process deletes it automatically when the goal of the push was to add an extra endpoint to the API. That's a good point. You still have in this workflow, because you see your CI/CD workflow is the same as you have today, and you just plug Humanitec for the last mile resolution of the graph, instead of doing kubectl apply, Helm upgrade, or Terraform apply and plan. So we will do that, all of that for you, right? Today, we don't have the Terraform plan in place. But in your CI/CD, you could see some diff between two deployments, but not as detailed as your Terraform plan. So that's something coming in the roadmap, to be transparent and fair. But there is some tools in your CI/CD that you could kind of mitigate this missing feature. But we are coming with something with the Terraform plan, which is a very good question. Thank you, Marcos. And yeah, to clarify what I meant that the entire process is done in an integrated CI/CD environment. Yes, you're right. CI/CD environment, but your CI/CD will ask Humanitec to resolve the complex graph that supposedly you are doing manually today. How you bind Terraform infrastructure output in your Helm chart as a secret. You need to do that manually today. Nobody is doing that for you, right? So you have something in place. Same with, I don't know, deploying customized Kubernetes manifest. We do that for you. That's the missing piece in your, I'm pretty much sure, ecosystem of tools. That's the notion of orchestrator. And yeah, thank you for clarifying. You're right. I hope that makes sense. Cool. Let me grab other question, because that's always helping me and the audience to better understand what I just illustrated. How do you track version of the app that's deployed? What does rollback look like? Yeah, good question. Thank you, AJ. Here, I will go back here. I will have this guy here, for example, where I have multiple environments, and I'm glad to see people playing with that. So let me grab this pod info. I could see here in PR1, you remember I did multiple commits. So guess what? In the status of the environment, that's the last deployment. But look at this. I have an history of all the deployment within this exact same environment, right? And you could see I have the commit message here. I could see the difference, and I could redeploy from there, right? Redeploy. So it will be kind of a rollback. I want this version. So for example, not the latest, but I want the previous one, or one specific version. So you will be able to redeploy the state that was shared at this time. So this exact same container, because if I do a diff, right, I could see that, yeah, the container image is not the same. The message has changed, etc., etc. So I could do some diff here and see more differences, right? And that's how you will be able to do that. All of that is driven by API behind the scene, and our portal has native support of that. If you want to do that in Backstage, that's possible, but you will need to play with the plugin and the Humanitec API. That's the feature you could have here. To your question about rollback, yes, it's not just a rollback on the workload, and also it could be infrastructure, so the resource dependencies. And we will track also the history of the infrastructure. So related to the previous question I got, hey, if someone is just removing from the score file, let's say a database, is it going in Terraform? Let's say it's a Terraform provisioner, deleting the database. Actually, to avoid this kind of accident, right? So to go back to the previous question and align with your question here, AJ, actually, we don't remove and delete the actual infrastructure of the dependencies if it's just from one deployment to another. We will delete the actual not anymore used infrastructure if you delete the environment, right? You remember there is a notion of environment here, or the project itself, to avoid such accident, right? So again, I'm repeating myself. I got the question previously, and here you got the rollback question. So let's say I'm deploying and I'm removing a Redis database. Oh, it deleted the Redis database, but now I roll back to the previous version. What's happening for my Redis? Is it creating a new one? Did I lost my database? The answer is no. Between subsequent deployment within the same environment, we are not deleting the actual infrastructure. It will be actually deleted if you delete the environment itself. So it's a safeguard here to avoid such bad activity or mistake sometime, right? And you could manually delete such external resources explicitly as well. So that's two options to guardrail that. Yeah, pretty slick. Thank you, AJ. Where can I see the resource definition? Yeah, I will go there. Thank you, Jose, to anticipate one of the next activity and part of the workshop. Let me continue actually for the content. I will go back to the question here, because what we have now, so what we did is we onboard an application, right, from Backstage, and we have seen some of the feature here in the Humanitec portal and in GitHub. So again, what you could do here, and I will speed up a little bit the process here, right? But what you could do here is, actually, if I go back here, I will grab my pull request already existing. Sorry, I just want to speed up a bit the process, but you may know how to do pull request. Otherwise, bear with me. I have an already pull request made. You remember here, right? So I will just do a merge, right? Because what I have today is this guy in green in my pull request, right? But if I go back to, and I could go in Humanitec, right? You remember in development, I have the blue background, right? So what I want to do is, if I refresh this page soon, when I will merge, I will be able to see this change, right? Because here I'm happy, quality tests are passing, pull request review, so I will confirm, and this will, I could also delete the branch, whatever, but here, guess what? It's doing something. As soon as I push in the main, and look at this, it's pending. I have an action, GitHub action going there. That's the one I described. You remember? Building the container, right? Pushing in the registry, and after that, deploying in Humanitec. So if I go very quickly here in Humanitec, I should be able to refresh here, and you see, deploying. So I just merge in development, I just refresh the page. I have a merge pull request, changing the color. Yes, that's what I want. And guess what? If I open this guy now in my main branch, I have the green background with the new message, which is good. I just graduated to development, right? Again, it's not magical. You got the point with my previous illustration and the question I got about CICD. Yes, Humanitec Orchestrator is an extension of your CICD, because at the end of the day, you will have this GitHub action, Jenkins pipeline, GitLab pipeline, Azure pipeline, interacting with Humanitec. And you remember, this deploy will do the Docker build, again, we'll do the Docker push, again, and guess what? We'll actually do the humctl core deploy. And here it's straightforward to a development environment. But also what I want to show you, you remember in the PR, I was able to have some message here. So summary, if I go back on a PR perspective, here, Actually, apologize for that. Check. Opening up here. You remember the message I got here, the comment in my peer with some insightful information without leaving my GitHub pull request. Actually, there is no magic happening here. That this pull request things doing the same stuff, because at the end of the day, I want to create an ephemeral environment. So you could see humctl create environment for this peer, so this branch, right? And then I will Docker build this current version in my branch, push in a registry. And at the end of the day, I will deploy in this specific new environment created. And remember, if it's already existing, I won't create a new environment each time I'm doing commit in my merge request or pull request. I will just redeploy. That's why I have the subsequent deployment here with a new version, again, with the container image here, right? And after that, I could interact with the API of Humanitec. I could grab the DNS. I could grab the error if there is any errors. I could grab the diff. I could grab some information. And at the end of the day, I will comment the PR. So that's how, no magic here. An extension of your CICD, pick up Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub Action here, and you interact with us, and we will resolve all the graph, right? And give you feedback that you are able after that to integrate with your CI/CD pipeline, right? So that's the aspect of CI/CD. And look at this. I don't know if you noticed. How many environments do I have now? Just 3. Before it was 4. You remember the PR1 environment created from a pull request? I closed the pull request. So what we did is here, if I go back to my workflow, I have a closed PR triggered on any closed pull request, right? And look at this, interacting with humctl, with Humanitec. Please delete this temporary environment. And here we will remove the deployment in cluster and all the dependencies. If it's Terraform, we will do Terraform destroy. Again, I got the question how to define the resource definition. I'm coming to this guy very soon, right? But that's, again, on an interaction from a developer perspective and CI/CD perspective. Let's go in the platform engineering and recipes and resource definition perspective very soon. I will pause a little bit. I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, please ask question, and I will capture some question here. Where can I see the resource definition? Yeah, we will go there. And I think, yeah, I covered this question in the chat. Before deploying to our internal platform, how do we make sure it's done within a safe and secure environment? And you said this is nice. Okay, maybe I already answered, but how you guarantee it's done within the safe, secure environment? Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I think I will answer when I will illustrate the resource definition and the recipes defined by the platform engineering. Because if we step back a little bit, we have been a lot focused on the developer perspective, maybe the CI/CD perspective. By the way, all this template and script you see should be abstracted, should be a template, right? If you're familiar with GitHub Action template, GitLab pipeline template, as a developer, I won't play myself with all this humctl and bash script and interaction with the API. That should be a template that I could reuse, right? In order to have another layer of abstraction, right? And we were very focused on the developer perspective, but that's the goal, right? That's the end goal of your platform, making sure they are abstracted and using standard, right? And they are focusing on their code, right? Integrated in their own workflow, right? Now, let's move on to the next piece, because here we just illustrated this guy here. I could show the graduation to a new environment, but that's the same interaction with the API. I could show you maybe if we have time, graduation to staging and production. If someone is interested, you could ask later. But yeah, because I want to cover more, let's move on to the resource definition perspective. So now I will be more platform engineer, right? The goal will be to see two main concepts here, how I decide where my database will be, right? In cluster, in AWS, in a safe environment like you are asking, what's a safe environment? So I could define all of that. And after that, we will see more security governance best practice as well and how to inject that. So here, I will go back to my Humanitec portal, right? So Backstage is more for the developer. You could use also Humanitec portal as a developer. You remember I saw previously this guy here, where it's a very simplified and focused to the application project I have access to, right? Again, that's my developer portal in Humanitec, complementary to Backstage if you want. But now, again, I will have this other view where I have access to more administration stuff, right? One of them is for sure seeing the application of everyone. I could see that maybe 25 people have been playing with this Backstage scaffolding, which is good. Thank you for that. You may have, you may want to do pull requests, but you may require me to approve the pull request. So please shoot the link of the pull request that maybe I could approve in order to see your flow going on here. But yeah, you could play with that. And that's the developer perspective. Now I'm admin, platform engineer, and I see everything. What here is very important concept, that's the resource definition. You remember in this guy here, let me go back. At the very bottom of this slide, bottom left, how I define this matrix, because at the end of the day, that's a matrix of recipes. In this context, for this type, here is a recipe. Oh, you are asking for this exact same type for another context, here is the other recipe if I want. So I could be granular as well in this recipe and resource definition, right? And let me go there. We have here, thank you, merge pull request. And actually, there is an approve and run. Boom. So thank you for the link. Feel free to drop your link here. The reason for Backstage versus Humanitec Dev Portal will be DevX and Backstage plugin not relevant to Humanitec. Peter, maybe let me capture this question later, if you don't mind. This basically, sorry, allows us to integrate multiple infrastructure software application across value chain. Yeah, you're right, Raul. That's exactly the goal. Hugo, you joined late. No, apologize. And want to catch up with the rest of the workshop. How did we bootstrap the first exercise? What are the first steps? I can see all the application, and I don't know how people got started. Feel free to ignore. Yeah, let me just be very kind with you. You could go to this URL, which is a Backstage instance, right? So let me make sure you could catch up. That's the Backstage instance, Google. And here from there, you could see the different project component you could create. And from create, that's the scaffolding perspective of a portal. As a developer, I want to be up to speed to scaffold a new project. And I will use one of the templates. So you could choose one or the other, grab the name, review, click create, and then you will have the ability to see here the access to the repository we will create from Backstage. Backstage will create the GitHub repository here, or you will be able to see in Humanitec what's going on. For example, the development, the actual DNS generated for you to test, etc., etc. So I will let you go there. I won't go back to this very much in detail. Yeah, no problem at all. I'm trying to facilitate everything. Cool. Let's dive in on the concept, which is, I think, the most exciting stuff, if I could say. Abstracting for the developer is for sure exciting. But here, how you make this magic graph resolution happening. That's the notion of resource definition. And here, you remember, as developer, I was asking, what are the available resource type, right? What can I use as a dependencies for my workload? And we just got Redis, DNS, Postgres, and MySQL. But at the end of the day, you decide. Do you want to bring Azure Cosmos DB? Do you want to bring, I don't know, Cassandra? Do you want to bring DynamoDB in AWS, Elasticsearch, Spanner in Google Cloud, Mongo, etc., right? So as platform engineer, and here, don't make me wrong, I'm doing that via the UI, but no ClickUps, right? I don't want you as platform engineer doing ClickUps, but to illustrate the concept, I will do in the UI, right? But at the end of the day, in Humanitec, it's REST API driven first. So you could interact and defining all what I'm going to show you via REST API, via the Humanitec CLI, HumCTL, for a platform engineering perspective. Or you could do that via the Terraform provider we have. Humanitec as a Terraform provider, and you could do what I'm doing here via as code, mechanism, and automation. Again, no ClickUps, please. But to illustrate the concept, I think that's a good illustration. Here, again, you could decide what you want. So for example, I will take a Redis database, let's say. I want to define for my developer that they could deploy Redis, right? So I'm selecting the type. Now, so that's the what. Now we will talk about the how. How I define what's a Redis database. That's not the developer figuring out how to do that. Here, you could see there is three main what we call driver and driver type. The most common you may understand at the first place is Terraform. If I want to, as soon as someone is asking for Redis, if I want to provision a Terraform script, because I have maybe my Terraform module, in order to provision Redis in AWS, memory store in GCP, Azure Redis, etc., you decide. You will bring your own Terraform module. So you select the driver for the type Redis, you select the driver Terraform. And guess what? You will be able to bring your script, your Terraform, right? Your Terraform module in your own private Git repo, etc. I won't go too much in detail here, but that's how you will do that. You will be able to bring your own Terraform module to say, hey, yeah, if someone is asking for Redis, that's what you need to provision. You will be able to inject credential and select the credential you want here. For the orchestrator, being able to provision your Terraform in this account, in this project, in this Azure subscription, you decide. And you will be able to define all these recipes, right? And here, what I could show you is I have already an example. After that, I have a Redis Terraform here. Configuration, I have already provided my module. It's in my Git repository here, submodule. I could pass some information, variables in the Terraform module. But here, that's the how, right? Now it's when. So we define the what, the Redis resource type, you remember? We are defining the configuration, which is the how. And now that's the when. The when is what we call the matching criteria. That's where you could say, here, by default, that's for everyone, right? Everyone will use this configuration, this recipe for Redis. But you could be more granular. You could say, no, that will be for production environment. Or maybe you could say for production and actually, or staging as well. And here you could say staging for this application, right? So you could be granular in the matrix of the recipes. And when we will resolve, we will take the most granular matching criteria on the definition you mentioned, right? And that's how we answer the when. And the context someone asked earlier, project and environment. That's where, with that, we will be able to pick up the proper recipe. Is it the most generic one for everyone, or do you want the most granular and least granular, right? So that's how you will play with that. What you could check as well is the usage after that. Who is using that, right? So for example, here, I have this definition, and that's not this one, but I have the Redis in cluster. You could see the usage. I have, I see someone who used Redis. Thank you for doing that. Apparently, this person was adding a Redis database. So let me show you how you will do that as a developer. And you picked up what I, platform engineer, set up for you, this configuration, and I will show you what it is, based on the matching criteria, which is by default, everyone will use it. So I could see the usage here and having more information. Here, again, I'm inserting the what, a Redis type. The how is another driver type. You remember Terraform is a driver type? What here I'm answering the request with, so the how, I want to provision an in-cluster Redis database. So that's what we call the driver template. Driver template is to drop for any type Kubernetes manifest in your cluster. In this case, I want to deploy a Redis in cluster and not outside. So that's where I will be able to bring my Kubernetes manifest as platform engineer in order to have my Redis, right? So here, container Redis, etc., volume, PVC, service, all what you want in order to define your Kubernetes manifest, in order to define the Redis database, right? So maybe I was a bit fast on that, but at the end of the day, look at this. I have here, I'm filtering all the recipes for this resource type, which is Redis, resource type Redis, right? And I can see all the driver I'm using. I'm using 3 main driver I mentioned, the Terraform. I want to provision Terraform, or having access to a cloud provider with Terraform, or I want to drop the manifest in cluster. And the third one is Echo. Echo is actually a good use case when you don't want to provision with Terraform dynamically. You don't want to provision dynamically in cluster, but you have an existing Redis database. So here, what you will be able to do is, yeah, it's static, it's existing. So here in this very particular case, I want to bring my own Redis database hosted here with this port and connection string, etc., etc. So that's the 3 main driver in order to answer the how you want to fulfill a request, in this example for a Redis type. But it could work for any type. MySQL, Mongo, you will decide how you want to design this recipe, right? So I hope that makes sense, because that's the important concept here. And that's the platform engineering with the help of the cloud engineer, security engineer, and maybe observability engineer, will be able to define this recipe, right? And I will deep dive on other concepts with that, but maybe let me grab some question. Can Humanitec help for Azure resources or only support for Kubernetes so far? Good question. Actually, you could do Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud or any provider, because you could bring your Terraform module. So you could bring your Terraform provider. So yes, you will be able to do Azure and other cloud provider out there with a Terraform driver for any type. Good question. I hope I answer the question. How can I manage compute resource for Redis at this example? What do you mean, Constantin, about the compute resources for Redis? Like customization about the Redis in Azure, or the size, the SKU, and the CPU and memory and version, maybe? If that's the case, actually, that's a good question. What you will be able to do, if I'm understanding the question, here, you will be able, so if I go back in my Redis Terraform, you will be able here to inject variable, right? So here you will be able to pass information, variable for your Terraform module. At the end of the day, your Terraform module should have a SKU variable, a region, and other maybe fine-tuning compute resources for your provider, right? So here you will be able to say, yeah, SKU, that's, I don't know, basic or whatever the vocabulary you have, right? So you will be able, in this recipe, you will be able to inject information. Here, what you could do, so it's very static, but that could be use cases. But you could also, another use case could be, I need, I don't know, the environment label. I will take an example like this, right? Here, what you could do is actually using dynamic placeholder. Please, in this context, grab the environment ID, right? So that's a kind of injection and customization for your Terraform module you could inject, right? And that's how you will do that, right? You will be able to inject dynamic or static variable for your Terraform module. With that, you could reuse, depending on the recipe, you could reuse your Terraform module. So I hope I answered the question, if I got it correctly. Otherwise, feel free to clarify. I have another question, Jose, about Pulumi and Crossplane. Crossplane with a template driver, because at the end of the day, Crossplane is a Kubernetes manifest. So you will be able to accomplish this via the template driver. For Pulumi, we don't have the out-of-the-box support. In Humanitec, you could bring your own driver. So let's say you want to have your Pulumi driver, you will be able to do that, but not out of the box yet in Humanitec for Pulumi. Right? Good question. Thank you for asking. I hope I answered this question. Otherwise, let me know if I could clarify. Command PR failed. No such file or directory. I probably didn't do that I was supposed to. Okay, sorry, Ryan. I will need to troubleshoot that if I have more time. I won't do that live to continue to focus on the content. Apologize for that, Ryan, but thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. Cool. If there is any other question, in case of multi-cloud, can I decide on which cloud provider to generate the resource? Yes, that's a really good point. Yes. So typically, you will be able, in the configuration, right? So here you see, I'm in Terraform, because in your case, multi-cloud, you will possibly, I'm guessing here, interacting with Terraform via Terraform to your cloud provider, right? And look at this. You will be able, even with the same recipe, right? So maybe switching from cloud, it doesn't make sense, but maybe switching from Azure subscription development versus Azure subscription production, AWS account for here, AWS region, GCP project X, Y, Z, you will be able to have the same recipe pointing to the same, let's say, Terraform module. But here you will be able to inject the actual credential, right? So you could play with that, define multiple recipe, having one recipe injecting based on the context, different cloud account here. But yeah, that's a good question. That's how you will be able to do that. And guess what? You remember when I say, as a developer, if I ask for a Redis type, here, the how, I can change it. Today, I could do with Azure. And tomorrow, for the same request, I could change this configuration and say, no, now it's AWS. It won't change anything on the developer perspective, right? And that's where you could have this how definition. I hope that makes sense. And I answered the question. Cool. Thank you for that. And yeah, before deploying orchestration. So what about GitOps for infra? That's a really good question. Thank you for that. And Raul, you try to answer. Thank you for that as well. Let me see. Wouldn't that be part of IAC, sorry, paradigms infrastructure layer before deploying for orchestration? Actually, a really good question. So Here, you remember what we did as an orchestrator, right? You said humctl score deploy. It's a request, a deployment. You remember what we did? What we did is actually the visualization is this guy here. We built what we call the graph. But before deploying and resolving the how, we just built the graph. So we have this representation, right? So the request is coming in, please deploy. We will resolve the graph, all the types of the dependencies. It will define what somewhere someone will deploy the graph, right? We haven't deployed anything. So we are building this representation. That's the first step. Guess what? The second step will be, are we deploying Humanitec Orchestrator? Do you provide, as platform engineer, the access to your private cluster? There is a secure way to do that. Are we contacting your cluster and dropping this Humanitec Kubernetes CRD? If you're familiar with Kubernetes, we have the Humanitec CRDs to represent the resources and the workload, right? Not yet provisioned. We drop that in Kubernetes, first option. Here we have what we call the Humanitec operator, resolving the Humanitec CRDs and actually deploying all the dependencies. Oh, it's Terraform. Let me call Terraform driver. Let me call the Terraform module. Is it template? Oh, we will drop the Redis database in the cluster. Oh, and finally, I need to deploy the workload, which is a deployment and injecting all the secret and config map. That's the operator doing that and resolving all of that in your cluster. Again, from the graph representation, we will drop the CRD and it will be resolved in the cluster. First option. Why I'm explaining this technical detail is because guess what? Second option you have, instead of direct access to the cluster, private cluster, don't make me wrong here, it's secure enough. You could say, no, we want to do GitOps. So we will drop the Kubernetes CRD in your Git repo, the representation of the graph. And guess what? Your GitOps, FlexCD, config sync, whatever the GitOps tool you are using, will pull this manifest. And guess what? The operator, Humanitec operator, will resolve the same way the CRDs. So either it's the orchestrator dropping the CRD, or it's your GitOps tool grabbing that from the Git that the orchestrator is pushing the CRD. I hope that makes sense. That's a really good technical detail implementation question. I hope I answered the question. But that's the beauty of the orchestrator. We are abstracting that. And guess what? You could say in development, you will go direct cluster, but for staging and production, you will do Argo CD and GitOps. But the same principle, graph resolution, will happen in the same flow, right? So that's pretty powerful here, and it's abstracted from the developer. You want to change Argo, Flux in one environment or the other, you could do that, right? There is different reason why you don't want to do that or why you want to do that. So I'm just showing you the option here. Good question. Thank you for asking. And I hope I was clear enough in my messaging and answer. Yes, but if we are using resource definition and using Terraform provider, then any change to repo will make the change to resource definition as well. So again, good question. And I want to clarify, GitOps is not for the score file itself. It's not for the resource definition itself. It's for the final deployment of the resolution of a graph, right? So this part, the last mile, if you're familiar with GitOps, there is this last mile iteration of manifest, right? Kind of. That's this part. We put that in the repo and your GitOps will drop the CRD and we will resolve to finalizing the deployment, right? But for score, no GitOps. For resource definition, no GitOps per se, right? It's still a push mechanism via the humctl or Terraform provider. that you could accomplish that. So I hope I clarify a bit. That's a really good question. I feel that's better given the reference architecture we are using for the workshop. I hope I answer the question. Raul, good question. And also Conrad. Cool. Yes, thank you. Cool. Wonderful. So we have this part here. We injected, we defined a Redis, right? So what I want to show you, because just 15 minutes remains, right? So at the end of the day, you remember I could go there, right? Going back here, I could be in my code space, I could be in my local, I could be anywhere. Guess what? How I add a Redis database? And someone did that, at least one person. Because here, what I could check, let's be precise actually. How many people were able by themselves to do Redis? Not this guy, but this guy here. Redis in cluster. Yeah, I just have this person here doing that, and myself, right? Here, what I want is actually, so I was tracking as platform engineer who is using Redis. But now maybe you don't know how to do, hey, I want a Redis, right? You remember in my demo? So here it will be my Redis, right? And here I will just say Redis, right? So that's how you will do that. Again, I will do a pull request and actually, let's do it. So I'm in pod info. I will be in my branch and I will do add Redis, right? Propose change. I will also create the pull request. Here, I will have a new, supposedly, trigger of the PR GitHub action. Yeah, that's the case, right? It will build the container, push the container, and again, at some point, create environment. So if I switch back to Humanitec while it's running, look at this. If I go to pod info, right, mine, not yours. Here, look at this. I have now PR2. So I have a pull request going on. It's still deploying. And guess what? Someone in this workload will and ask a resource dependencies. So it's still resolving the provisioning information. So it's still going on. We will wait a little bit. It's not going to take too much time here, right? And in parallel, if I open this resource definition and I go to my Redis in cluster, guess what? We just have now a third application using Redis, right? So that's pod info. And if I go back, the deployment should be done now. Let me refresh. And look at this. In addition to DNS, direct reference from my workload, guess what? I have here a Redis database. And the Redis database is using this recipe. In this case, it's in cluster. Maybe I could select Terraform, depending. But that's how it took 5 seconds to provision. And I have some information. And all the connection string was injected. I could route to which environment variable I want the connection string, etc., etc. I didn't do this part. But here, I just provision Redis in cluster. But it could be somewhere else, right? So that's the end-to-end flow on how to define and how to use and how to track usage as well. So I hope you got some feeling about the power of such integration. What I want to do now is the last step here, part of this workshop, is to making sure I show you how I inject more security and governance, right? One of the questions was earlier about how I make sure about the environment is safe. There is multiple aspects. We mentioned the cloud account, you remember? So you will have least privilege access to provision things in your cloud provider. That's one step. When I was defining my Redis in cluster, I don't know if you noticed, but I was able to inject security context, for example, and having such security and governance in place in the recipe I'm building, right? If I'm provisioning a public S3 bucket, it's maybe not good, right? But that's your Terraform module, right? So here you should have best practice over there in place. Humanitec is not playing a role here. But as soon as you want to inject more information and more features in your external driver, one of them could be how I make sure that any namespace, because we deploy a namespace in Kubernetes as soon as you do a deployment. Deployment, remember, Humanitec app, it's a pair of the project, Humanitec app and environment. We are building and actually having a namespace with this request. And here, what you could do is adding more context in your namespace. And guess what? Here, I defined a resource type namespace, and this namespace is using the driver template. Because at the end of the day, as platform engineer, I want to crash and deploy a Kubernetes manifest as soon as a graph is resolving the namespace, right? So here, I'm defining what the naming convention I want as platform engineer, and I want also to inject the manifest. So for example, if you're familiar with that, that's where I could inject restricted PSS, pod security standard. So for example, in any namespace deployed via Humanitec in the cluster, they shouldn't run as privilege, for example, right? And as root. So here I'm putting a restriction on any namespace deployed via Humanitec, right? And that's how you could have more security in place. I may want to, I don't know, add cost center label, right? Here it could be hard-coded, it could be injected dynamically as well, depending on the context, because you have the namespace very generic. So that's how you could inject labels, tags as well for FinOps and security as well in your Kubernetes template or in your Terraform, right? That's how you could do that. And now, if you're familiar with PSS, what you need to do now, because a developer won't do that, is you need to actually force the security context on the pod and container, right? How to do that? Guess what? Yet another resource type, which is, again, namespace. And here, this guy is workload. They are not explicit resource asked by the developer. They will be implicit and indirect. For any deployment, we will have a namespace. And for any deployment of a workload, we will have a workload, right? So by default, you could inject for any workload, guess what? A configuration type template. And here you could inject best practice in security. So anyone deploying a SCOR file will have, let's say, a deployment in Kubernetes and will inject the security context. They won't run as root, they will run as user, they will use a runtime default, and et cetera, et cetera. They don't allow privilege escalation. They will drop the capabilities, read-only file system, not privilege, right? And here, it will inject for any workload deployed in the cluster. Again, back to the question, how I make my environment secure. That's one of the examples you could do in order to do that, right? And again, here, I got my application doing that. And again, in the resolution of the graph, we have the explicit dependencies here, but also you may have noticed we have what we call the shared resources. And you see here, cluster namespace. That's where I could use and see that my actual deployment is using my secure namespace. I could click on the workload as well. And guess what? We have the explicit resource asked in the SCOR file, DNS or Redis in some cases. But here I have the explicit one, which is a workload with all the security context injected. Again, all of that abstracted from the developer, right? So I hope that makes sense. I know that maybe I was a bit fast on this part, but that's very important here, right? Let me grab some question. I see we are at 5 minutes of the end at the end for the end of this session. So let me grab some question. How would you imagine happy path for migration to the Humanitec as a platform from the cloud infra, mostly managed by Terraform modules that are maintained by different teams? Yeah, consolidation, migration, or usage of existing Terraform module. Andre, that's a really good question, maybe a longer discussion, but you're right. I think consolidation will be a good part because people could drive some standardization. But the first baby step is if you have a Terraform module, you could just plug in one resource definition, injecting the proper variable. There is an output contract with your Terraform module to have. So what we put in place often is a wrapper on top of your module, existing module. So you have a wrapper Terraform module used in the Terraform, in the resource definition to use your Terraform module, right? And you could pick and choose your existing Terraform module to support what your developer could use via the orchestrator, right? And yeah, that's iteration, that's consolidation. That will be my very rough answer. I know it's a longer discussion, but yeah, that's strategy here to have, right? Reusing or recreating existing, but let's reuse as much as possible as well to mutualize and keep on the investment you have been making and see how to integrate, right? So there is some strategy here that we could discuss if you want more information. Can we use OpenShift as resource instead of Kubernetes? Yes, for the runtime. Yes, actually here, I didn't mention that, but you remember one of the indirect resource is the cluster. And here you could bring any Kubernetes cluster, right? It could be a straight Kubernetes cluster. It could be OpenShift. It could be manage EKS, manage AKS. At the end of the day, you bring your cluster. So OpenShift cluster is working here as well. Good question. What do you mean by a recipe? Are there templates available to understand what are the ingredients required? Yes, that's a really good question. And that's the what we call the Humanitec resource packs. That's kind of the recipe Oh, I'm not spelling correctly the name of the company I'm working for. But yeah, that's this guy here. You could look at all the resource pack, answer, type answer, boom, send. Yeah, that's the link. Good question. That you could look at the resource pack. In cluster resource pack, for example, I want the Redis in cluster, I want the Redis in AWS. So that's the kind of recipe, I could say, that you could use as is or take inspiration to build your own, right? I could continue on answering the question, but actually because just 2 minutes remains and to be respectful of the time of the people, I hope it makes sense. It made sense, this flow. I hope you learned a lot. And I know it was a lot of content. And I took the time to answer the question because that's also illustrating what I was mentioning. At the end of the day, what we just accomplished. On a pure velocity and stability, we use Core, we use the portal, Humanitec portal and Backstage actually, and the orchestrator. But at the end of the day, we didn't cover this project mindset, right? So again, the question with the existing Terraform module could be part of the strategy. Which one do we want to support officially and standardize, right? So that's a kind of roadmap question and item with a project mindset. But we saw this end-to-end flow. I hope it makes sense to have these two personas here. The product we have seen, we have some process to help you as well, and strategy to build your first minimum valuable platform if you want, etc., etc. So please reach out if you want to know more. We have my colleague Mallory delivering in a few days, next week, sorry, how you could start your MVP, your minimum valuable platform. So if you want to sign in, it's in the event page. So here you could see humanitec.com/events. And you will see also coming webinar from the platform engineering community, as well as some colleagues of mine. I hope you enjoyed this workshop. I know it was a lot. Some of you were able to do some hands-on. So I'm very happy to see that. I hope, yeah, again, it was a good workshop. Please provide your feedback about me, about the content, about whatever, and the question you may have. We may want to follow up with you regarding the rest of the question you have. Again, I hope I answered all the question live. For the remaining time, let me cool. Yeah, I think I answered all the question, and I see some people that are answering the question as well. Cool. Thank you very much. We are at time, and I want to be respectful of the time of everyone. Thank you for your time, and yeah, maybe talk to you soon.